Advisory Council presentation promoting environmental health of Lake Luxembourg. I'm sure a lot of people have noticed driving past that Lake Luxembourg in Court Creek Park has been drained for dredging, and so this is going to be a presentation by our Environmental Advisory Council to help explain what's going on and why this is great for the long-term environmental health of the lake. That's going to be Tuesday, September 20th at 6:30 p.m. and it'll be right here in the public hall. Again, Tuesday, September 20th at 6:30. And the next upcoming event is another beer garden, and this one is going to be at the Parkland Fest Community Day, and that is Saturday, October 3rd, 2022 at 12 p.m. to 4 p.m., and that's at Firefighters Park. So please join us at Parkland Fest Community Day for the beer garden, Saturday, October 8th. Next on the agenda, special items. We have a conditional use hearing. This is for Paranormal Cirque, Oxford Valley Mall, October 6th through October 9th. Mr. Esposito.
Okay, so we're going to open a hearing now for a conditional use application. The applicant is Cirque Entertainment 3 LLC. The property is 2300 East Lincoln Highway, Langhorne, PA. Tax map parcel number 22-057-020-001. It's actually the parking lot outside of the closest to the JCPenney building at the Oxford Valley Mall. The owner of that property is Simon Property Group. The relief requested is conditional use approval from ordinance section 500-2411 G1 to permit a temporary community event in the GB General Business Zoning District. The temporary community event is a circus. Is there any representative, if you could just come up to the podium. I would ask at this time if there's anyone else in the audience that would like to become a party to the conditional use application. If you are a party, you would be permitted to ask questions of the applicant themselves. Seeing none, we're going to move forward. Before I ask you to tell us about your event, I'm going to submit exhibits. The first one we'll label as B1. It is the application of Cirque Entertainment 3 LLC for a conditional use. Exhibit B2 is the notice of the hearing and proof of advertising. Exhibit B3 is the proof of mailing and proof of posting from the township. The proof of mailing is for the residents or the owners of properties within 500 feet. Exhibit B4 are the applicable provisions of the township zoning ordinance. They are section 500-3109C, the general requirements and standards applicable for all conditional uses in Middletown Township. Section 500-2411, which is for temporary community events, and section 500-2411G, which is temporary carnivals and circuses. Exhibit B5 is a recommendation of approval of the conditional use from the Middletown Township Planning Commission. Exhibit B6 is an application package submitted by the applicant. The package includes the applicant's experience, recommendations, proposed hours of the event, a site plan, an emergency fire and evacuation plan, permit applications, tent plans, and a seating chart. So at this time, actually, I'm going to ask the township manager to provide a little bit of a summary of the event.
Okay, for background for the residents in attendance and the board, as Solicitor Esposito mentioned, temporary events like this are required to gain conditional use. This is in the township's GB, General Business District. The applicant, Cirque Entertainment 3, submitted the conditional use application. They are interested in holding a 4-day event at the Oxford Valley Mall, October 6th through 9th. For this application, the applicant also has to maintain compliance with our zoning ordinance's temporary community event section. Just a few items to note. The hearing was advertised in a newspaper of general circulation 2 times within the timeframes for the municipality's planning commission. We did, the applicant and the township sent public notice to all property owners within 500 feet. Notices were mailed back in August to 132 properties. The property where the event is going to be held was posted with the notification of the scheduled hearing at 3 clearly visible locations last week. We also received a letter of consent from the mall management allowing this event to occur on their property. The Planning Commission reviewed this at their September 7th meeting. There was a recommendation for approval by the Planning Commission. They did have several conditions to their recommendation for the October 6th through the 9th. First, that the exhibits that were presented during the Planning Commission, would reflect what actually happens, full compliance with our zoning ordinance, full compliance with obtaining all necessary permits and approvals, and finally posting a $3,000 escrow to cover the township's costs for fire, police, and emergency services. So that pretty much gives the background. If the board has any questions or if you have anything further to add, please feel free.
Could the applicant just provide a little bit of an overview of what exactly the circus will be like, what it'll involve?
Please swear.
Yes, ma'am. My name is Benjamin Holland. My home address is 9701 Lawndale Drive in Silver Spring, Maryland, 20901. Holland, Holland.
Thank you, Mr. Holland. So if you don't mind, please tell us just a little bit about the circus.
Yes, of course. What we have is kind of the things you normally think of a circus. It's there's no animals involved. It's all human-based acrobats. It's an event. People come out. They buy tickets. We have it themed around kind of the Halloween season, haunted October, things like that. When people walk in and they come through, there's a haunted maze type thing. It's people jump out and try and scare you, such as any typical haunted house. After that, they go and they sit down. We have a bleacher set up. And then people sit down and then watch the show. It's about an hour and a half long, maybe an hour 40. And they sit down. We have acrobats from all over the world. We've brought people, stuntmen. We have a magician, things like that. But it's all, themed around that Halloween scary season type thing. But that's just the theme of the show. It's acrobatics and things like that. So people come, they sit down, they have the best time of their life, and then they go home and tell all their friends.
And you're proposing to have 4 shows, October 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th in the evenings, correct?
It would be a total of 6 shows. So over those 4 days, it would be 6. So 1 on the Thursday, 1 on the Friday, and then 2 on Saturday, 2 on Sunday.
Yeah, I see that here. And is it a single tent?
It is 2 tents. 2 tents. Well, the first one is just a kind of a walk-through and entrance tent, and then there's one large circular one, which is where the performance takes place.
Have you held your circus in other communities similar to ours?
Yes, we have held our circus in almost every community across the United States. It's been running for about 4.5 years now. We've been coast to coast, all the up and down the East Coast, over to California, Texas, South Dakota, Wyoming, anywhere you can think of, name it, we've been there. We were actually in Bucks County maybe 5 months ago, I would say, at the Neshaminy Mall, I believe it's called, in Bensalem. I hope I got that right. I'm sorry, I get the things mixed up sometime. But we were around there, and it went very well, and we're back here in a slightly different location. It'll be in Langhorne at the Oxford Valley Mall, and we hope it goes well.
Thank you.
There are a few slides I forgot to mention if you want to just real quick. This shows you where it will be. This is in your packets, but it depicts where various things are happening. That shows you a little bit about the tent and the stadium seating, I guess, the bleacher type seating. That's it.
Do people have to purchase tickets in advance, or can they purchase tickets at the door on the night of the show?
Either way, most of our ticket sales come from online sales. We have the website, it's paranormalcirc.com, so most people buy them in advance, but also we do have a box office that's on site that would be in front of the rectangular structure that you saw on the map. It's just in front of there where people can buy tickets at any time they wish.
Thank you. Any other board members have questions for Mr. Holland? Okay, go ahead, Mr. Esposito.
If there's no other questions, we can actually close the hearing, but then still allow public comment after a motion is made or before, depending on what you want to.
Does a motion need to be made before the hearing is closed or afterward?
It can be after,
Okay, then we can close the hearing.
I'm sorry, closed testimony of the hearing, not the actual hearing. I apologize. Okay. If there's anybody from the public that would like to make a public comment, you can come up right now. Seeing none, if the board's so inclined, I can make a motion.
I will make a motion to approve the conditional use for Paranormal Cirque at the Oxford Valley Mall from October 6th through October 9th. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Ms. Hanna. There's been a motion and a second. Are there any board questions or comments? Any questions or comments from the public? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes 4-0. Thank you, Mr. Holland.
Thank you, sir.
Next on the agenda, public comment on non-agenda items. This is public comment on non-agenda items only. Is there any public comment? Seeing none, we'll move on to the consent agenda items. Item A, consideration of authorizing payment of September 19th, 2022 bills list in the amount of $1,635,714.79. Item B, consideration of approving the September 6th, 2022 minutes of the public meeting of the Middletown Township Board of Supervisors. And item C, consideration of approving payment certificate number 1 for the 2022 road program to James D. Morrissey, Inc. in the amount of $38,925.60. Is there a motion on the consent agenda items?
I make a motion to approve consent agenda items.
Thank you, Ms. Hanna. Is there a second?
I'll second. I'll second.
Thank you, Ms. Kane. There's been a motion and a second. Are there any board questions? Any questions from the public? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Passes 4-0. Next on the agenda, consideration of the preliminary final land development approval, 130 Middletown Boulevard and 2340 Lincoln Highway, Langhorne, PA, 19047 TMP 22-057-020-006 and 22-057-022S/LD number 22-04 GB General Business Zoning District.
Good evening. I'm Ed Murphy. I'm here tonight with Justin Gennady on behalf of the applicant to present the land development plans for the redevelopment of what we refer to as the Bally's portion of the ring road of the Oxford Valley Mall. To my left is Justin Gennady of Dynamic Engineering. He is the project engineer. And I guess for those that may be unfamiliar, the site in question has been, you can use whatever term you like to describe it, but in poor condition would probably be an understatement. And what you see there is representative of the Bally's building and what it looked like until our client removed it. So the building has now been demolished. It was the subject, as I think we've talked about maybe once before, of a lot of issues that the police department had to deal with on a far too regular basis. So the good news is that one, the buildings have been removed, and this project was originally conceived in 2019 and then got embargoed because of COVID. But in the last year, 14 months, we've been back actively pursuing the various permits and approvals that we need for the project. We had first to go to the zoning hearing board to seek several items of zoning relief, which we accomplished almost a year ago today. And since then, Justin's office has prepared and pursued the preliminary as final land development plans for the project. And if you want to go to the next slide, Justin and I can talk about the site. Even though Bally's has been the dominant improvement on the site, you can see that the property is somewhat irregularly configured. It is located at one of the entrances to the mall from Route 1. And there were multiple buildings on the site. There will be again, and there's one building that does remain that has been and continues to be tenanted, which to their credit, it's one of the few that were able to survive COVID and its aftermath. So The property does maintain significant amount of frontage on Middletown Boulevard. It's slightly less than 5 acres in size. And if Justin wants to go to the next slide, we'll, got a bigger one than that? It will be, yeah. Justin, perhaps I'll give him the mic and he can talk a little bit about what the improvements that are depicted in the different shades of ecru or tan that talk about it, and then we'll talk about the status of the approvals and some requests that focus on pedestrian connectivity, which we understand is a significant design objective for this site.
Good evening, everyone. So this slide that you see in front of you is just an aerial overlay of the proposed improvements on the existing. So you can see the existing mall and off of Lincoln Highway. So this is just to show you how that our proposed improvements superimpose on existing. If we go to the next slide, this is I guess a better rendering of what's being proposed. So you'll see Middletown Boulevard along the top of the page. You'll see Lincoln Highway at the lower right corner of the page, and then right behind where we're seeing the one of the other board members, that's the access road to the mall. So as you work your way, I'm going to start at the top left of the site. You'll see that the two buildings side by side where the Bailey's Fitness used to be, the building closest to I'm going to start clockwise. So closest to the top, that's a 5920 square foot retail building that's being proposed. Directly next to it, there's an interior courtyard, and then another 5,600 square foot restaurant building being proposed. Parking surrounding the structure, you'll see sidewalk. We'll get into sidewalk in a little bit of how the connectivity between the mall is going to work throughout this development. As you work your way around, there's a light brown building. That is the existing building to remain. That's the Pearl Vision mattress store. That is to remain. There's two properties here that are both under same ownership, so you'll see that the parking is being proposed for both of them, which we already have zoning relief for. And then lastly, the dark brown building most closely to the adjacent to the access road. That's another 6,345 square foot building. That's a split building. You'll see that there's a drive-through use. It's a split drive-through restaurant and retail. As part of this development, there's absolutely zero stormwater on the site right now. We're bringing in the site up to complete compliance with both township and DEP regulations. And you'll see that their access along the Lincoln highways to remain. We're working with PennDOT and the township traffic engineer just to make sure that all the improvements proposed are up to standard and in compliance. And there's two access points provided along Middletown Boulevard. One is a full access driveway where the Middletown Boulevard has a break in the center median. The one to the top left of the page on the western portion of the site, that's a right-in, right-out restricted access just because of the existing Middletown Boulevard, the median in Middletown Boulevard. This next slide, through discussions with both township staff and your township consultants, we understand that there's obviously the improvements being proposed on the mall for the apartments, and of course, connectivity to this site, being that it's a commercial retail use, is desired. So we were originally here requesting with the Planning Commission a waiver from doing sidewalks just because of there really connection points to nowhere. It really wasn't getting us anywhere. But after discussions with township staff, we're providing full sidewalk through the site and around the perimeter. So you'll see what's highlighted in yellow. I can't point because it's a TV screen, but you'll see everything highlighted in yellow and red along the perimeter of the site's proposed to be sidewalk connectivity. That's going to bring you from the apartments up in the top left corner of the screen through the access road and all the way through our site.
The highlighted improvement in the upper left-hand corner in red is something an improvement that Phil Worst in particular recommended during the course of the plan review, and that was a signalized pedestrian crossing that would enable folks either on our site wishing to go across the street to the mall and to the apartments currently under construction, or vice versa, residents of the new apartments wishing to access the various retail and restaurant uses on this side of Middletown Boulevard could have a safe place to cross. And that topic has been the subject of a lot of conversation between Phil and the staff about our responsibility for that. So what we've come up with, and piggybacking on top of our ordinance-required off-site traffic improvement, would be an additional contribution that would end up being $60,000, which would get us more than halfway to the total cost today of what the anticipated cost of that proposed signalized pedestrian crosswalk would be. That is exclusive. We're responsible solely for all the sidewalks on our site. We're not looking for any consideration in that. That's on us. But so we are acknowledging our responsibility for the off-site traffic impact fee, plus the other contribution to hopefully make that signalized crossing at some point a reality. I'm not sure. Other approvals would be required from Simon, et cetera, and that's still to be done. But we think that what we've proposed is more than represents our obligation to assist in trying to create that opportunity for safe pedestrian access across Middletown Boulevard. So that effectively is the presentation. We did review. There are a handful of waivers that we're prepared to review with the board if you'd like. They'd previously been reviewed, and I think Isaac has supported them, as did the Planning Commission, with the one exception of the sidewalk reference that Justin made reference to, which we've now addressed by agreeing to fully provide sidewalks around the entire perimeter and through the site to get to Middletown Boulevard and to Route 1. So that's where we are tonight, and we're here seeking your preliminary as final land development approval for the project with support for the waivers.
Thank you, gentlemen. Let me just say first and foremost, certainly the overall long-term vision for this property is something that the board is focused on. And so because of that, pedestrian connectivity is certainly something that's front of mind for all of us. So I personally appreciate, number one, that you're willing to withdraw the sidewalk waiver and the efforts that you're making toward pedestrian connectivity and the contribution towards the cost of signalization. So personally, I appreciate that. Is there or are there tenants lined up for the structures that are to be built on the property yet?
There are tenants lined up is probably too strong a word. There are multiple tenants that have expressed interest in all the different retail locations. None of them have reached fruition yet where we could comment publicly on them, but there are several that are probably more interested that we probably, all of us, when you know about them, would love to have them become part of the Middletown community if it could happen. So,
Okay. So the only waivers then that are currently being requested are preliminary and final, the access drives, the planting beds, the parking areas, and the trees.
That's correct.
that's right.
Okay. Do any other board members have questions for Mr. Murphy?
Yeah, so the restaurants being proposed, will they have any areas for outdoor dining?
So if you look, and I'll move back one slide, it's a little bit easier. So between, and you look at the top left corner of the page where the two buildings are side by side, there's two patio areas being proposed, one between the two buildings and one off to the right of the building that's more of an L shape where we're proposing to be restaurants.
Sort of the light gray color between those buildings.
So yeah, right between the buildings and then off to the side right here, they are proposed to be outdoor seating. Obviously, the architectural plans for these buildings are yet to be designed, but we are accommodating outdoor dining.
Okay, great.
I have two questions, if you don't mind. One, I was wondering what kind of time frame we're looking at, and number two, the restaurants in question. Was one of them to be a drive-through and the other to be a sit-down restaurant, or were they both sit-down?
So to the first part of your question on timing, so once we get through here tonight, we still have to get some of the outside agency approvals finalized now that we're through the township. So probably early next year for an approval and for a construction start in the middle of next year. As far as the second part of your question, the drive-through use that's proposed at the lower right corner building, that's still to be determined, depends on the tenant that comes in, but it is proposed to have both a drive-through component and an indoor dining component. So a quick serve restaurant is really what it is.
Okay. And the other one is not, though. The other one is this more of a sit down. Is that?
Only one drive-through restaurant is proposed, correct?
Okay. That's what I thought. And once, so if you begin about middle of next year, how long do you see the construction process taken?
Probably a year, I'm guessing, so probably the first documents, maybe first quarter of 2024.
Okay, thank you.
So one of the, just hoping you can walk me through, so one of the variances that you have is for parking spots. So less parking than what our ordinances are required. Can you kind of walk us through to make sure that we don't anticipate a problem with parking at this area?
Sure. So that was zoning. So we went through the zoning hearing board, provided testimony to the fact that due to the nature of your ordinances and the collaborative and how these uses are going to function together on one property, the way this building is, the way this properties are divided, we didn't consolidate the lots. So they are two separate properties. So there's 175 parking spaces proposed for both properties, which is sufficient to serve all the uses on the property. But just where those parking spaces fall on a particular lot makes one lot insufficient in parking and one lot overparked. So if we were to consolidate this and treat this all as one parcel, the parking would have been compliant. But because we did not subdivide and they operate as two separate parcels, one of the buildings technically is non-compliant in parking if you look at the parking just available on that individual lot. But on the overall basis of this project, it's compliant for parking. And if you go back, so if you look at this slide, this shows you the outside perimeter, that's just a 200-foot setback showing you what's within 200 feet of the property. But the thick yellow line in the middle, you'll see that there's two parcels. You'll see the irregular shape that kind of follows the perimeter of Middletown Boulevard. And then where we have the light brown building, that rectangular piece is a separate parcel. You'll see the property line spans over the buildings and over parking spaces. So we weren't able to make compliant parking on that individual parcel, but overall we're still adequately parked.
And then just additionally, so from a landscaping standpoint, I know, we're adding a lot of impervious surface coverage. So I'm just wondering, one of the things that, the apartments coming in gave us a lot more green space than what we're seeing. So turning a lot of that parking concrete into something that people will want to walk through and connectability. So can you talk through your landscape plan and how that kind of flows, knowing that, we as the board are trying to make sure that as we're revitalizing this mall, we are making sure that it flows and we have that connectivity between the various sites.
Sure. No, it's a great question. And if whoever's controlling the screen, could you just zoom in a little bit on that so we can see this is existing today. So you'll see that it appears just because we're providing a color image that we're adding a lot more impervious. We're not really adding impervious. There's a sea of impervious on site today with no stormwater management and barely any landscaping. So as part of our development, as we go through, there's still going to be impervious. There's still impervious proposed. We're providing a significant amount of green space that we can provide with still providing adequate parking. Still, the uses are still under from a building and an impervious standpoint. We did not ask for an impervious variance for being requested.
And the building square footage of that plan, if you approve it, is actually equal to or even a little less than what's out there today or was out there with Bally's and the others. So
Yeah.
It's not only no more impervious, the building coverage is a wash, if anything. But the landscaping, as Justin referred to, is obviously we complied with your ordinance, but it's probably we're probably better than your ordinance would require in terms of landscaping. So.
Sorry, Mr. Murphy, you weren't speaking to the microphone, so the folks at home couldn't hear you.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Oh, and as far as landscaping, you'll see this is the rendered version, but all the trees being proposed are accurately to our landscaping design. We have over, I think, between trees, shrubs, and ground cover plantings, there's well over, I think, 600 plantings being proposed for this development, fully designed by a landscape architect and worked with your township consultants just to make sure it's compliant as well. So we are trying to make this an attractive feature, given its location and what's being proposed. Obviously, we want to draw in as many tenants and patrons as possible. So it will be attractively landscaped.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions from any other board members? Seeing none, I will make a motion to grant preliminary and final land development approval for 130 Middletown Boulevard and 2340 Lincoln Highway, S/LD number 22-04, with the following conditions. Applicant shall comply in full with all requirements of the Middletown Township subdivision and land development ordinance and the Middletown Township zoning ordinance unless relief is granted by the body having jurisdiction. And 2, all comments still outstanding in review letters shall be fully addressed for plans to be considered final, including the approvals of outside agencies, i.e. PennDOT, for completion of the plans in their jurisdiction. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Ms. Corporal. There's been a motion and a second. Are there any questions from the board or comments at this time? Seeing none, are there any questions or comments from the public? Mr. Warren.
Andy Warren, Shady Brook Drive. I realize that you can't name an eating establishment, but I am interested in the definition of restaurant. Without naming, or do you envision a restaurant being a McDonald's type? Do you envision it being a Sandy Sports Bar type, a Dawson's Steakhouse, or a Chris Rich, what's the other rich steakhouse? Ruth Chris, yeah. Do you have any idea what might there be? And one last point, you don't envision a drive-through Starbucks, do you? Because there is one in Newtown, and there's hell to pay going through that parking lot.
No, and again, we don't have a tenant in mind, so the ordinance definition is limited to obviously a restaurant establishment, but we are also limited by the drive-through stacking, what we have on their site. We're not going to be able to provide some of the uses that are noted because we won't have ample stacking. A lot of those tenants may not even be interested in the site due to the stacking, so we are limited in a sense by our zoning and by the parking that we have, but we are under the definition of a retail and restaurant use. Correct. Thank you. Sure.
Any other questions or comments from the public? Seeing none, there's been a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Passes 4-0.
Great,
Thanks, gentlemen.
thank you. Good night. Thanks for your help.
Next on the agenda, consideration of preliminary and final land development approval for 627 Old Lincoln Highway, Langhorne, Pennsylvania 19047, TMP 22-03-14 and 22-023-015 S/LD number 21-01, C commercial and R2 residential zoning districts. Yes, sir.
Good evening. My name is David Shafkowitz. I'm here tonight on behalf of M Property LLC, which is the owner of the parcel of property in question. As the board may be familiar with the site, it's currently improved with an existing Dunkin' Donuts, about 1,200 plus or minus square feet. It's located on the corner of West Maple and Old Lincoln Highway. The property is, I don't know, is it up to me to get to the plan? There's an aerial of the site showing it on the corner of West Maple and Old Lincoln. Another portion of this property, well, to give you the board some background, this process started on this particular site about 2 years ago in the throes of COVID, where Dunkin' Donuts brand, the corporation, gave this owner and several franchisees the option to do one of two things, or incentivized the franchisee to do one of two things. One is, if you can get yourself a drive-through on this particular, on any site, they were going to incentivize them to do so. If you couldn't, they were going to permit them to close without any penalty. What this particular client or applicant or franchisee chose to do was to acquire more property, which he did just directly adjacent to this parcel, off of also Old Lincoln and West Maple, fronts on both properties, to allow for the construction of a drive-through on this site. So what the applicant has done is he's chosen the former rather than the later. He wants to keep this store viable, wants to keep this store open. And in doing so, We knew there was going to be a lot of zoning relief that was going to be necessary for the site. We knew there was going to be some design criteria. We know it's a busy intersection. We know there's a lot of traffic. So we decided to take the process of exploring potential with the Planning Commission first. The Planning Commission was wonderful and very helpful and gave us very constructive criticism and gave us guidance on how to potentially pursue the project. After receiving that guidance and kind of formulating our plan, we went to the Zoning Hearing Board. The Zoning Hearing Board granted certain relief that was necessary to allow the use, essentially, which is in the C Commercial District, to be expanded slightly into the R2 property that we purchased below. There was also some other relief that was granted, and as the board may know, back in 2010, 2011, when the Dunkin' Donuts was established, there was another zoning application at that time that allowed for the parking that exists. So the other part of the problem that we were facing with the site is after we got the zoning relief is now designing it. Is how do we deal with the fact that we're on this corner and we have a wide open kind of ingress and egress problem and a parking problem on the site, and now you want to add a drive-through? Are you crazy? This is going to be a mess. So that's some photos of what the existing site looks like, which I know the board is somewhat familiar. That's the existing features plan that shows the existing site, the two parcels that are at play, and what has been proposed. So getting into a little bit about what's being proposed is the applicant is going to keep the existing structure of about 1,200 plus or minus square feet. What the applicant is proposing is to limit or control the ingress and egress both on West Maple and Old Lincoln. Naturally, both of these are going to be subject to PennDOT permits and PennDOT review, but through Mr. Worsta's office and with some preliminary discussions with PennDOT, we've been able to come to a conclusion of what would ultimately work on the site in terms of movements and appropriate locations for the ingress and egress. The applicant is then proposing to install a 3-lane drive-through system. The drive-through system works is that one lane is for kiosk ordering. The second lane is for mobile bypass. So if you already ordered on your mobile phone, you can go through the second lane and bypass the kiosk and pick up your order. Through some, I think there's a commercial that says techno-wizardry, right? Dunkin' has the setup where they know your phone, they capture your phone, or if you have the app on, they know when you're there, and they have your order ready. The third is just a pure bypass lane to allow people, if they get into trouble for circulation, to circulate out of the site. We also are proposing, for purposes along West Maple, is a decel lane along West Maple that would allow people to get off the highway as they approach the property and get into the queue for the drive-through. With the double lane system, we expect that we can get somewhere in the 10 to 12 car stack on the site, which would be more than sufficient for this size Dunkin' Donuts. We're also able to maintain the 14 parking spaces that were permitted under the original zoning decision back in 2010, 2011. The applicant is otherwise providing for the appropriate loading and unloading, trash removal. We're proposing sidewalks from the portion of the decel lane that starts where there's a retaining wall, up along West Maple, around the corner, and down Old Lincoln to the point where the balance of the site will be in at some point for future development, at which time the sidewalks will be finished along both West Maple and Old Lincoln. The other part that's interesting about this site is, and I know it was mentioned in the previous application, is there's no stormwater management on either property today. The applicant is proposing an underground system for this site that allow for infiltration and allow for discharge at a reduced rate. I also believe, if I'm reading the site correctly, there's new inlets that are going to be proposed along West Maple, which should be a great improvement to the residents who are experiencing some of the downstream water that just sheet flows through the site today. So we hope to capture, infiltrate as much as we can, and then obviously release at a lower rate. Those are the highlights of the plan. The applicant is seeking preliminary final land development approval for just this particular portion of the project. The applicant understands there's outside agency approvals that are necessary, PennDOT being the most important. And I think that about covers it for now. With me tonight, I do have Adam Powell, our site design engineer, Albert Federico, who's our traffic consultant, I know that from all the input that we've got along the way, which was considerable, traffic is the big issue. I like your staff has been extremely helpful in working with us in terms of kind of narrowing this down and getting it to work in a way that we hope will greatly improve the site because of how bad it is today and how wide open it is today. We actually agreed with the Planning Commission that we wouldn't come to see you guys tonight unless we knew that we would have PennDOT's, blessing's not the right word, but buy-in in terms of the movements and the ingress and egress locations for the site. So I hope that gives you some background. I'll keep my professionals in reserve in case there's questions, which I'm sure there will be. But if there's any questions on what's being proposed, I'd be happy to answer them.
Questions from the board?
Yes, so a couple. With the drive-throughs, we know, we have a Dunkin' Donuts in the township where it consistently backs up onto the street. And the fact that we're only using one of the drive-throughs for customers driving up without the mobile queue, do we have any anticipation of having those backups onto 213?
I would love to tell you no, and I think I can tell you no, but like I said, maybe Mr. Federico can tell you a little bit more about that. But the way Dunkin' Donuts is set up, and you probably heard this story before, is that they have a certain time frame that they're supposed to serve a customer at the window and provide their product. Somewhere between 90 and 100 seconds, they're supposed to serve their customer. What they do is when they have that number in hand, it gives them an idea of how many customers they can serve per hour, how many cars per hour they can serve. So what we do is then we back into what the stacking amount should be. So we think with the use that Dunkin' gets today on the mobile apps, with regard to the people who will drive up and order from the kiosk or from the screen, that we have somewhere in the neighborhood, like I said, about a 12-car stack that'll give us enough, more than enough room to service those customers in a time. And like I said, I think Al could talk a little bit more about what those hourly numbers would be. The other thing is the other part of that was, God forbid, in the worst of the times, which of course I think the client would say we'd love her to be busy, but we don't want to be too busy, is the decel lane to make sure people get off the roadway and provide us with another 4, 5, 6 cars that can get off the roadway and not impede traffic while they're getting into the site if that occurs.
Okay. So how, can you walk me through how many cars you anticipate that it would be able to handle with the deceleration lane?
Now I'll turn it over to Mr. Federico. You're outside my pay grade.
Hi, good evening, Al Federico. One thing we noticed that seems like there was a little confusion. This plan is, there's been some revisions to it since we were last at the Planning Commission meeting, but this does generally show the driveways in the correct locations. But with respect to the drive-through, the clear unobstructed queuing before you get back to the circulation lane is between 10 and 12 cars. When we evaluate, and Phil's very familiar with this, same methodology that has been used in other projects, the primary constraint in the queuing is at the window. 60 seconds is the goal time. So you can process 60 cars an hour if you're hitting your maximum time. Clearly, all of the franchisees are incentivized to keep those times down. And they do have a great deal of data on how long people spend at the order board, picking up, paying. And this exceeds what Dunkin' Donuts requires of their franchisees. And based on the volume of traffic that we're anticipating, it's expected there's sufficient queuing on site that it will not extend onto Maple Avenue. However, if it does, based on that turn lane, you could fit another 5 or 6 cars beyond what we're planning for. I would expect, though, that more people, if it was, they would bypass this. There was just a recent article the other day about how Starbucks is having, what they're trying to do to improve their flow to avoid, I believe they're calling it line bucking, the people just pulling out. But with this site, I think we've got a fairly good amount of storage for the proposed use, and they're going to be able to process these vehicles.
Great, thank you. So in conclusion, you do not anticipate an issue of backing up onto 213?
I do not.
Okay.
Can I just, do you mind, Ms. Keane, while we're on
Yeah,
that subject,
go for
have
it,
Mr.
yeah.
Worcester, Mr. Worcester, our traffic engineer, is here, and just have him weigh in on this topic?
Yes, we looked at that significantly with regard to the queuing, as we have for any other drive-through restaurant in the township. And we're satisfied that this one is acceptable with regard to the amount of queuing and the queuing space that they provide. And as Mr. Federico and Mr. Shafkowitz said, the time frame of moving people through the drive-through is the most critical. So that's a hallmark supposedly that we've seen in Dunkin' Donuts, but supposedly is going to be the same as the one we're seeing now. But we don't anticipate a queue, and we certainly don't want to have a queue even in the deceleration lane that's going to be built. That's to get people off the road. Could be used for a queue if there's an extra car or two, but like they also said, once people see a car in the road waiting to get coffee or something like that, they're going by. So it'll be rare if that ever happens.
Thank you. I'm sorry, Ms. Keane, I didn't mean to
No
interrupt
worries. I know this is right next to, right now is Woodlands. So this is kind of a consistent theme to tonight, I feel like. Could you walk us through kind of your landscaping plan? You know, I know that right now it is very heavily concrete. Are we doing anything to add trees, add green, as well as, you know, what are we doing with the woodlands that could be potentially getting cut down?
Again, a little bit outside my pay grade. I'm going to ask Adam Powell to talk a little bit about the landscaping scheme. But on this second plan set that we proposed, is right now what's being proposed for this site is nothing to do with the property below. So I don't think the property below is in the woodland condition that we want it to be in, but we're not proposing that or any changes to that as a part of this application. Nevertheless, being next to a residential district, there is a significant amount of planning and buffering that's being proposed for this particular site. New landscaping, everything we could do to beautify the location. So, Adam, do you mind if giving a little overview of the landscaping?
Good evening, Adam Powell, civil engineer for the project. There are buffer requirements between us and the residential properties. So along our back, to the left of the screen and along the bottom, there will be vegetation. There's also going to be vegetation around the perimeter of the building. We are limited to putting large trees and plantings along Old York Road and Maple, basically for traffic lines of sight. So there aren't going to be many trees along the front perimeter simply because of the intersection sidewalk we're proposing and the lines of sight. But there will be vegetation around the perimeter or the back of the building and around the building itself.
Okay, great. And then the last thing, if whoever's kind of in traffic, can you walk me through the flow? It doesn't look like someone's going to be able to get back out onto 213 making a left. Is that still the case?
So, and that's kind of what I was referring to. This is an older version of the plan. Based on coordination with the township and PennDOT, and in compliance with the township review letter, left turns out of Old Lincoln Highway, that driveway, are going to be prohibited. So you'll only be able to make a right onto Old Lincoln Highway. Vehicles will be able to make a left onto Maple Avenue.
Okay.
And it's evolved a little bit since then. I would also just note, since it's not reflected here, as part of this initial phase, there is sidewalk proposed along both frontages. And the sidewalk along Maple Avenue, per what we discussed at the Planning Commission, will extend down to the end of the retaining wall, kind of almost midway through that deceleration lane.
Any other questions from any other board members? Ms. Corporal or Ms. Hanna?
question. They'll still be able to, people will still be able to go inside to eat as well. So it's just an added drive-through, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, just to confirm that again. So there's no changes being proposed to the existing structure on the property, correct?
That is correct.
And the existing parking spaces on the property are remaining in place, correct?
Just in a different configuration,
It's the same number of spaces?
same number of spaces. Actually,
Okay, thank you.
my staff tells me a little bit more, but, so.
Okay.
Yeah, so one of the other features, I probably shouldn't belabor the point, because I know we've been doing this a lot, is that one of the other features as part of that improves the circulation is when you leave the building, if you could see, there's a little right-hand turn lane that allows people to recirculate back into the site. What happens is occasionally we'll get a larger order that can bottleneck that drive-through. So this gives us the ability to push people back out into the parking area and wait for their order, God forbid, if they order something for school outings or what have you. So they're not bottlenecking that drive-through waiting for the big order, which can then force people to back out. So when the bigger orders come in, they can simply circulate through the site, park out front, and we can safely run their order out. So just wanted to mention that.
Thank you. So I know we have at least one public comment, so I'm going to call for public comment now. I'm going to read an email that we received from Jerry Judson, Judson, 651 West Maple Avenue. I'm reaching out today with concerns about the proposed drive-through piece of the project. I have lived at 651 West Maple Avenue for 49 years and witnessed the daily traffic backups and accidents on this road. The amount of cars that travel on Maple has tremendously increased over the years. If a drive-through is approved at this location, it will lead to more accidents. When the traffic isn't at a complete standstill, cars race up and down Maple Avenue. Having a drive-through will surely be a distraction and will be more dangerous for anyone traveling on the road. For this reason, this project should not be approved. If it is, it will encourage more activity on an already inundated road. When that land was rezoned for an ice cream shop, Connie's, in parentheses, it was under the pretenses of having limited hours and customers that stayed longer at the location to enjoy their treats. Furthermore, Belmont's and this parcel was grandfathered in and didn't have to go through certain studies prior to approvals. Lastly, I was not notified of tonight's meeting from the township, which I should have been for transparency's sake as a resident/neighbor/stakeholder. If there is a call for a vote tonight, please do not approve this project. There needs to be resident input, parentheses, advertised in advance of meetings to allow public comment, and more traffic studies. First, can I just ask either Ms. Teoli-Cools or Mr. Esposito just to comment on notice requirements and what notice was provided of this agenda item?
Sure, we notify residents for the Planning Commission, and we advertise our public meetings through our website. Residents don't receive a second mailing when something moves from the Planning Commission to the Board of Supervisors.
Yeah, and I'm satisfied that all the notice requirements were adhered to for this agenda item.
Mike, I just want to add to that. There's actually no requirement to notify residents of subdivision and land development matters. The township actually goes above and beyond and does it for the Planning Commission matters, which is not an actual requirement under the municipality's planning code.
And not typical.
Right. Thank you. And that is true. The township does go above and beyond in terms of notifying potentially impacted residents. And some of the other concerns dealt with traffic, although we heard a lot of information from the applicant and from our traffic engineer, Mr. Worsta, about the potential traffic implications and how they're being handled. And personally, I think I'm satisfied that the plan to manage traffic coming into the site and going through the drive-through is reasonable. So is there any other comments or questions from the public on this item? Yes, just please come up to the microphone and state your name and address.
My name is Joyce Martindale. I live at 738 West Maple Avenue, Langhorne. Right down the bottom of the wooded area is where we live. 4 houses are planned on going into that wooded area, so I know that's coming up. It's not going to be wooded. It's a bad corner. It's a very dangerous corner. There's been many accidents there. I can't imagine if someone sees the Dunkin' Donuts drive-through, that they're not going to turn left halfway down the hill. You can't see going up the hill. It's a steep hill. I'm sure you know where it's at. You can't see. We have trouble getting out of our driveway. It's so hard. And with the drive-through there and then coming out up at Old Lincoln Highway, they're going to try to make another left and then another left to go down Maple Avenue. There's going to be more accidents. It's dangerous. If it stays the way it is, it's fine. There's not too many problems, but a drive-through, it's too dangerous. Not counting all the water that's going to come down the driveway, down to this little gully down the bottom of the hill that they're planning on pumping up the hill, which then turns around and comes back down again.
It's all directed back down to our house.
Well, hold on, we got to do one at a time because
You can't, Bob.
people at home can't hear you if you're not talking into the microphone.
So I'm just against the drive-through. I think it's going to cause a lot of problems in that area, especially when the high school's in, because the kids stop in. I think it's a dangerous corner to have that all added in. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am. Just please state your name and address.
Donna Lorenz, 716 West Maple Avenue. I'm the driveway right at the bottom. And I agree with my mom. I can't get out of the driveway now. That traffic backs up. And then they're going to have that little turnoff, and if they can't get into that turnoff, they're still going to back up onto 213, which keeps me from getting in and out of my driveway. And the cars fly down Maple. I mean, you saw it the other night when he was out there talking to me. Guy coming down going 60 miles an hour. I'm making a left out of there. It's a bad area for a drive-through with the traffic dropping out on Old Lincoln Highway and on Maple. It's just not a good area. You can move up to the Oxford Valley Mall where they have a spot for a drive-through. That would work. But I don't think it's a good spot for a Dunkin' there, for a drive-through. The way it is fine. And like I said, the water, they're talking about pumping it underground. I have a little culvert out there that's been out there for over 100 years. I had PennDOT out. They won't replace it. We have almost 4 acres of land, but we get 16 acres of water. And that was through the township and PennDOT talking to both of you. It comes down Old Lincoln Highway, down through the back, out between our houses to that same thing, to that same culvert out front. And then you're going to send more water from this. It can't handle it. And if it's not cleaned, I'm the only one who cleans it. Then it floods across Maple Avenue, and it's washing out the road over there by the golf course. I don't know what else to do. We can't handle more water and the traffic. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Kessler, do you want to talk about the stormwater?
Yeah, I'll try to clarify a little bit of what they have proposed on the plan, and the applicant can add to this if they'd like, but there is no planned pumping, buck and grade at all with what they have on the plan. The underground storage that they're proposing would be for the site they have shown, the paved area to be captured in there, and then to have rate control to release that into the storm system as it needs. During regular storms, that usually does a really fine job of controlling how much is going into the pipe system. There are storms that kind of exceed capacity, as with any drainage system in the township. For where it goes from there, it connects with a series of storm drains they have shown kind of in that deceleration lane that would be widened on West Maple. So as far as kind of a before and after view of what they have on their plans, right now there is not any detention on site, and it flows kind of as it flows through the site and on West Maple. And what they're proposing is to at least add some rate control to that system, and then connect as it leaves the site into the existing system on the roadway. As far as features down the road, it is a PennDOT roadway. If there's areas that need kind of further attention or need to be revisited, that's something we can always bring to PennDOT's attention. But for their site development, they have within their project limits stormwater rate control and then connecting into the system in the roadway.
Thank you, Mr. Kessler. And I want to give the applicant an opportunity to, because again, traffic concerns were raised and this idea of backup and potentially accidents, and I guess, the difficulty of making a left-hand turn out onto 213. Do you want to respond to any of those concerns?
Yes, Mr. Federico actually has the accident data for the area, and I think the board might find it interesting to hear this about how many new trips will be generated by this site, so.
No, when we did the traffic study, we looked at the collision data, and there was not a significant pattern of reportable collisions in the area. Because the study was started during COVID, I actually pulled the updated data before coming here tonight. And even though we hear a lot about how accidents have gotten worse during the pandemic in this area, the numbers, at least along the site frontage here, actually went down. Ms. Martindale and Ms. Lorenz, they have been at the Planning Commission meetings, and we've heard their concerns. Right now, the accesses are fairly wide open, and I use that generously, and very close to the intersection. By consolidating the accesses and defining them a little better, believe that is going to provide better operations. I do agree with her that there is a crest there, but we believe, based on our evaluation, that there is adequate site distance. And this is something that still needs to be, go through the PennDOT process. And of all the things they check, site distance is probably right up there. So if they have any concerns about that, we will have to address that.
Thank you. And yeah, for the residents, PennDOT approval is still required, so that obviously would have to go through that process if ultimately land development is approved tonight. Are there any other questions or comments from the public? Any other questions or comments from any other board members? Okay, I'm going to make a motion to grant preliminary and final land development approval for 627 Old Lincoln Highway, S/LD number 21-01 with the following conditions. Applicant shall comply in full with all requirements of the Middletown Township Subdivision and Land Development Ordinance and the Middletown Township Zoning Ordinance unless relief is granted by the body having jurisdiction. And all comments still outstanding in review letters shall be fully addressed for plans to be considered final, including approvals of outside agencies, i.e. PennDOT, for the completion of the plans in their jurisdiction. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Hanna. There's been a motion and a second. Are there any board questions at this time? Any questions from the public at this time? Seeing none, there's been a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Passes 4-0. Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Next on the agenda, presentation of the 2023 minimum municipal obligation to the township pension funds.
Thank you. You have in your packets this evening a memo regarding the pensions minimum municipal obligation. State law, Act 205, requires that each year the chief administrative officer certify to you what the pension contribution will be for next year. And so you have that information in your packets prepared by our actuary. For the non-union or non-uniformed plan, that number is $463,917, down slightly from last year. And the contribution for the police pension plan, $2,996,190. That's also down about $250,000 from last year. So really, there's no action required. I just need to make sure that I certify this information and provide it to you publicly. You have the 2 pages that show the calculation of the MMO, and I'm happy to answer any questions for you.
Any questions for Ms. Tioli-Cools about the MMO? And again, no action is required from us.
No action is required.
Informational, okay. Since there are no questions, we will move on to the next agenda item, which is consideration of approving the following 2023 Regional Development Authority Grant Program Application Resolutions. and they are Resolution number 22-24R, Police Department Vehicles, Resolution number 22-25R, Public Works Vehicle, Resolution number 22-26R, Fire and Emergency Management, and Resolution number 22-27R, Pendel Middletown Emergency Squad. And these were addressed two different times, really. At the last meeting, we had a discussion about it, but no action was taken. And then prior to that, at our capital planning session, when each of the departments presented to the board, there was discussion about RDA grant requests. So, Ms. Tealy-Cools, do you want to present on this item at all, or if any board members have questions?
Yeah, no, I have nothing further. This is a requirement that you adopt the resolutions so that we can submit the applications, which are actually due next week. And so I think we've pretty much hashed it out in public more than once. Just need, you can do it as one motion as well if you'd like.
Okay. Does anybody want to make a motion? If not, I can make a motion to approve the following RDA grant program resolutions. Number 22-24R, number 22-25R, number 22-26R, and number 22-27R. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Kane. There's been a motion and a second. Are there any board questions? Any questions from the public? What? Yeah, I'm trying to go fast, Mr. Warren. I was surprised you showed up tonight. Seeing none, any questions from the public? Seeing none, there's been a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes 4-0. And that brings us to other business. Mr. Kessler.
Nothing further. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Esposito.
Nothing, thank you.
Ms. Corporal.
Nothing, thank you.
Ms. Kane.
Nothing further.
Ms. Hannah.
Nothing further.
And I have nothing further. Oh, wait, I forgot Ms. Tealy-Cools. Got anything?
Nothing, thank you.
I hope not. All right. With that, I will accept a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second?
Second.
We're adjourned. Thanks, everybody.